Tony, welcome to the Risky Scientists.
Hi, Bruce.
Tony, we're going to talk about the latest safeguarding guidance from the UK government.
Yeah,
First of all, just explain to our viewers what your current role is.
yeah. I've got a few different hats actually, depending on when you catch me, Bruce. I run something called the Coalition for Marriage, C4M, number four, c4m.org.uk, which is UK's leading kind of pro-marriage organisation. Tens of thousands who promote this thing. We believe that marriage is the term which describes what only a man and a woman can do. That doesn't mean other things don't take place in a liberal democracy. Of course they do, but we think calling those things marriage is a category error because it then dilutes this thing which all the evidence says from a sociological perspective has profound implications for society. It needs kind of the attention that we're not giving it these days, and we need to kind of get back to giving it more attention. All the evidence around us says, the results aren't great. I'm also chair of the board of something called the Family Education Trust, which is a wonderful organisation that undertakes research in family-orientated ideas and methods and background and everything else like that. And again, it has a fund for research, and we commission research, and people approach us to say, would we publish their research? And so the two things are kind of linked. C4M, FET, as we call it, is wider than C4M and is more research focused. C4M is more campaigning based, lots of different. In addition to that, I happen to be a Christian, and I spend a lot of my time going around churches, delivering marriage refresher courses, biblical masculinity talks to people, and all sorts of things like that, premarital courses, and I do those for churches and for secular organisations also as invited. So that's something that interests your hearers and readers, listeners, whatever. Please get in touch.
Yes. And I will post links to all of those things in the description box below. All right, so Tony, we are going to talk about the UK government's latest statutory guidance for schools and
Mhm.
colleges
Mhm.
titled Keeping Children Safe in Education 2026. Who could disagree with that? Except, as we both know, all sorts of things are smuggled in there, and the excuse of keeping children safe is actually becomes an excuse for ideological agendas and sometimes persecuting children with the wrong views, even the wrong
Mhm.
political views, or just for being boys, which we should talk
Mhm.
about.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
but first of all, let's be fair. Let's talk about what we like in this new draft. So, over to you. First of all, what do you like?
Well, it's 200 pages of guidance and footnotes and all the other stuff. So and it's a consultation document. So the idea is it comes into force in September of this year, 2026, and you've got 10 weeks to respond, which again is a lot of information to respond to in 10 weeks. 22nd of April is when people need to feedback, and the feedback process is I'm supposed to be talking about things I like, but the feedback process is pretty much impenetrable, which maybe there's a reason. I mean, it covers things like it looks at what you'd think it would look at, knife crime, and it looks at the grooming gangs, ticks all the kind of right boxes. There's an awful lot of talk there. Um, and so from that point of view, it's picking up on issues in the zeitgeist, which is great, I suppose. Um, but I think that my key problem with this document is not those things, but it's the things it smuggles in, and it bundles all those things. Which how can you object to this sort of how can you object to trying to get rid of knife crime and to kind of deal with grooming gangs? How can you object to that stuff? Well, it bundles in some very sinister stuff with those very good sounding things to make you feel that if you're objecting to those good sounding things as well. So yeah, yeah, fine, I like some of those things, and it's obvious stuff, and it's motherhood and apple pie, but actually it's really dangerous in terms of what it smuggles in there, under the cover of saying really good stuff about those things.
Yeah. So you mentioned the feedback process is problematic in itself. Now, I've given feedback, and I'd like to talk with you about the flaws in the feedback process on a
Yeah,
public consultation in a moment.
yeah.
But let me just complete this this circle on what we like. So within the 200 pages, very few things are clear. There's all sorts of opt-outs, loopholes, and caveats, which I don't like. The two things where there are none of those things, there's no opt-outs, is where it's very clear that children of one sex should not be using single-sex spaces, and secondly, they should not be sharing dorms or rooms when they're on field trips. So there is unambiguity on that.
Yes, apart from where it comes to toilets, which is perhaps the most important aspect.
So then paragraph 110, where a school or college provides mixed sex toilets in addition to single sex toilets, schools and colleges should assess safeguarding risks and plan accordingly. Oh, for God's sake, there's that discretion.
Here we go.
Yeah,
exactly. So you've got paragraph 106, 108, and 110 are the key paragraphs here. So 106 correctly states the school premises regulations 2000 and what are they? 2012, aren't they? I think. So it correctly states those and requires separate toilets for boys and girls age 8+. Para 108 notes the exception for, let me get this right, notes the exception for self-contained lockable cubicles, but then para 110 advises schools on managing mixed sex toilets, right? And that's a category that beyond the lockable cubicle exception shouldn't lawfully exist. So it's advising, on the one hand, it says great. On the other hand, it advises on how to manage a category of toilets that shouldn't exist. So it's kind of, it's incoherent, if you like.
It's infuriating. I mean, this is what I've said in my reporting on the guidance as a whole. It has all these opt-outs. It is clear in one paragraph, you should not do this. And then you get to another paragraph which says, well, except you have the discretion to pretty much do what you want.
Except that's exactly right. In
this case, but paragraph 110, it says schools and colleges should assess safeguarding risks and plan accordingly. For a start, there's two problems with this. One is that it gives the schools and colleges all the discretion. So if they mess up, right, if they have a case, as we've seen in America, where a girl is raped in a mixed sex toilet by a boy pretending to be a girl, then the school and college could say, well, we assessed the safeguarding risks and we planned accordingly. I'm sorry it didn't work out, but we followed the guidance. That's the first problem.
I mean, again, and this is the problem. There are so many exceptions to the rule that any school can argue they're within it and be legally justified. And again, it should be very obvious, Bruce, to you and to me and to every ordinary human being, that actually you have boys' toilets and you have girls' toilets, and they're separate, they're not mixed, and you only access it based on your biological birth sex. End of conversation. It's very easy to state, and you put it clearly like that in a document. But this is the problem with this document. It's got this confused, twisty language under which, and I'll go through the other points on the trans stuff, which is it says one thing, but then it says another. And any school, is going to look at it and think, well, we're going to have to act as cautiously as we can, which means interpreting it in the, so there's should we go into it? I mean, do you want to go into it, or
let me just close that point. So I think my first exception to this sort of rhetorical device is what I just said is that it gives discretion to schools to abuse. Schools that have a transgender ideology will use that discretion to push transgenderism at the expense of children who are not comfortable about sharing mixed-sex toilets. So schools could end up with more mixed-sex toilets than single-sex. And they could claim that they're just following the guidance because they've got so much discretion. That's my first point. So it rewards...
You look at paragraph 110 and it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it rewards extremism, or it gives discretion to extremism. Right. So the second problem is, even if a school is not extremist, doesn't have this agenda, it ends up confused because what one paragraph says you should have single-sex spaces, and the other sex should not
Yeah,
be in that
yeah,
single-sex space. But hang on,
yeah.
your same guidance tells
And
me
it
that
does
I
this
should have.
throughout the document, Bruce. It
Yeah,
does this throughout the document.
it's infuriating.
Yeah. And I don't know, right? In all honesty, I don't know whether it's just incoherence, right? Or whether in fact it's, you get the feeling that actually, no, this is part of a process that on a first reading, you look and you see loads of safeguards. Actually, it's fine. But it's only those people who will study it in detail, as some of us have done, that actually say, hold on, there are clauses and exemptions and exceptions here and things in the footnotes which actually undermines all of that good stuff that you say up front. Yep. So I don't know if it's just incompetence and incoherence or if it's actually strategic. My
It could be
personal
both.
view, it's probably the
It,
latter. But yeah,
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 yeah. It could be both. I mean, in my feedback, I said some of these paragraphs are so badly worded, they're
yeah,
incomprehensible. And I think
yeah,
that's just incompetence. And then some of these paragraphs have
yeah.
opt-outs, which seem to be deliberately written to pander to extremists so that they have the discretion to push their extremism. At the same time, as I've said in my reporting, there are not admonishments against that sort of extremism. So, for instance,
Yeah.
when a school is granted discretion to to teach about controversial views, but to do so in a sensitive manner, there is no admonishment against the abuses we've already seen. The abuses such as teachers being accused of being terrorists because they show Trump
Mm.
videos of Trump
Yeah.
supporters, or
Well,
or being
I
hounded.
mean,
Go
it's
ahead.
even
Go
worse
ahead.
than that. It's even worse than that. Teachers being reported to prevent the anti-terrorism organization for saying a marriage should be between a man and a woman. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Or
so
or Britain is a
all
Christian
sorts of
country.
crazy in a Christian school, right? Citing the Bible's teaching on marriage in a Christian school can get you reported to the anti-terrorist watchdog. Ha, oh my goodness. Now, in
Yeah.
my opinion, those who reported such a thing ought to be kicked out. They have no place in a school looking after the interests of little children. Yep, they're misplaced and they ought to be kicked out. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we should have a separate discussion on the lack of
Yeah, yeah,
accountability. I mean,
yeah,
briefly,
yeah,
just
yeah,
particularly for my American viewers, they'll be surprised to
yeah.
hear that there isn't a chain of accountability, or that there is a nominal chain, but it is monitored. First of all, the schools are checking their own homework,
Mm.
because if you complain about a school,
Yep,
you first of all have to complain to the school, and the school investigates
yep.
itself, and invariably
That's
it doesn't
exactly
find
right.
any fault. Yeah, it
That
and it and
and
it
this is all in the
usually.
gender guidance as well. Yeah,
Well, let's get to that guidance. Just to complete the narrative here, the school will reframe the complaint, avoid parts that it just doesn't want to deal with them. And then, so what
yep.
is your recourse? Your recourse is you're supposed to escalate to the local authority. And the local authority employs people who are hired from these same schools and trusts, educational trusts, and they're all colluding. They're all colluding with each other to suppress complaint.
Mm,
And then, so
mm,
local authority will, in some cases, ignore the complaint. They will literally
yep.
say, the school has dealt with it, and you're the complainant saying, well, the school hasn't dealt with it. That's why I
Yep.
escalated to you. And the local authority will say, no, they have, and we're not taking
Yep.
it further. And then your recourse is
Bruce,
what you.
it's even worse, Bruce. It's even
Yeah,
worse
go
because you
ahead.
could find your children put on a watch list. Yep,
Yeah,
a local authority watch list. And you could find that, if they're older children and then later on they're going for a job or something else like that, there might be a check, you've got a police check, which we have in the UK for sensitive types of jobs. That'll be listed and they might not get a job. They might not be employable in certain sectors, because of they objected to some kind of teaching or some form of teaching, and it was interpreted as anti-misogynistic or whatever else, you know. So it's even worse than just being ignored. You can be positively punished for speaking up.
Yeah, well, we should talk about just briefly. We can talk about some real cases of that are in my reporting and your reporting. So we've got, so I've reported on a parent who was banned from school property because he tweeted about the Britain society is falling apart,
Yep.
and he
Yeah.
blamed he partly blamed immigration, and then the school punished him for that, banned him from school property.
Yeah.
And another case where we've mentioned, I think we've alluded to the case of Henley College, where I've
Yeah.
spoken to the teacher. The teacher has chosen to remain anonymous, but the teacher's story is in the public domain. He simply showed he was teaching A-level politics, and he showed is American politics in a class on American politics. He showed videos from both sides of the 2024 presidential election. Some students supposedly complained about showing one particular side, which was videos by Trump supporters, and then he's accused of being a safeguarding risk, which, as you mentioned earlier, evokes imagery of a child abuser, um,
Yeah.
and he's also flagged as a terrorist risk under the
Yeah.
Prevent program.
Yeah. Yeah. And it means you can't work. It means
Yeah,
loads of investigations then start. Your professional body excludes you, and you're under investigation. And the bigger thing is that the meta effect is the chilling of culture. Everyone else then thinks, well, I can't speak. I daren't say a word. I daren't say a word because this will happen to me. And
yeah,
unless and until those people who do this are held almost like health and safety law, and this is where I think we ought to go, right? If you breach a health and safety law and somebody dies or something else like that, you're personally accountable. Yeah. And we have examples of chief execs of organizations, being getting into very big trouble, even, I think there's been custodial sentences and things where they've been held accountable for breaches in health and safety law. I think we need to go there with this sort of thing. You end up ruining somebody else's life and it wasn't justified, you get it yourself, you know? And until we do that, because what happens with all these virtue signaling, kind of do-gooders, is that they hide behind a corporate veil with a massive legal fund, and nothing affects them. The Ben Dabowski thing, the head who kicked him out, the head suffers nothing. Ben suffers everything. His teaching or his professional association exonerated him completely. Yeah, but he's in trouble now. He's got blighted on his record, Meanwhile, the head just carries on. The head's, hides behind a massive legal fund, which is bottomless, public legal fund of one description or another, and they just carry on. I think that's wrong. Just like health and safety, if you incorrectly ruin someone's career and damage their life, you personally suffer the consequences. Otherwise, it will just carry on ad infinitum.
yeah. So we have a problem of accountability
Oh yeah,
in
yeah, yeah,
in British education generally, and guidance is supposed to help with that accountability. Clearly, it has what I have called loopholes and escape
yeah,
clauses over and
yeah,
over again. So just I'm going to give you the example that I've chosen to focus on in my reporting, and there are loopholes for hiding information from parents. It's page 12. It says the guidance
mm,
says if you have concerns about a child's safety and have decided to share information to protect them from a risk of harm, whenever it is safe and practical to do so, you should engage with the child, their parent, or carer. The next paragraph
mm,
confirms you should not, uh, however, inform the child or their parent or carer about your decision to share information if doing so could put a child or others at further risk of harm. So there's the discretion again. There's no admonishment
yeah,
against the
yeah,
abuses we've
yeah,
already seen,
yeah,
because what schools are doing are saying they're saying parents are putting children at risk of harm. And therefore, we don't have to
yeah,
share information about it. This is very clear in transgenderism, where a child tells the teacher that they are transgender, they want to change the pronouns. And elsewhere in the guidance, on the very issue of transgenderism, the guidance says you should inform the parent, and we have the golden rules in other guidance, and they're copied into this guidance. One of the golden rules is that teachers should not keep secrets, a child's secrets, from their parents. But the guidance gives these
Yeah.
loopholes, saying if you believe there could be harm by informing the parent, don't inform the parent. And ideologues can say, well, I think that parent is not on board with the extremist interpretation of transgenderism that I have. So I don't want the parent to know, because the parent might undermine the child's autonomy in deciding that it actually isn't born the gender that the parents think it is. So I'm going to
Yeah.
hide the information
Yeah.
from parents. I find this disgraceful.
Mm, mm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's paragraph 263 actually from memory, which says if a child confides in you that they've got gender questioning issues. Yep. So they haven't transitioned as such, but they've got significant gender questioning issues. They don't know if they're a boy or a girl and they're struggling with it. Yep. Then you don't have to tell the parents. You don't have to say anything if all they're doing is confiding. Yep. And even,
Yeah.
when they want to chat, I think it's 251 that talks about if they want to transition, well, the school deals with that request in consultation with the parents. Right.
Oh,
So it completely it undermines, the parents are cut out of the problem. They're cut out of the situation. Firstly, if they confide, they don't have to tell the parent at all. And secondly, as you say, when it does progress, they talk to the parents in a consultative aspect, and that's it. And the
mm,
child and the school can do what they want. The parent is merely consulted, which
yeah.
again is like, oh no, you're supposed to be in what's called loco parentis. You're acting in the place of me while you're there, but actually, I'm the parent, and I can overrule at any point. It's my child. Get your hands off. And this is just one of many examples where the state is getting inside the family and saying, actually, we know better than parents, and we'll tell
Yes.
parents what to do and how to do it.
And,
And
and
yeah, and
it's
really have your
empowering.
kids. Yep.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Tony.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, no,
I would say
you carry on.
it's the government is empowering teachers to be the primary carers, right? So parents become secondary. So like
Yeah, yeah,
you rightly identified this awful term. I've reported, I've highlighted in my reporting that awful term that teachers are consulting parents on what's
yeah,
best for the
yeah, yeah,
children.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
consulting parents.
yeah.
Hang on a minute. Shouldn't that be the other way around?
I know,
And
right?
again, it gives this discretion to teachers to hide
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
you you were correct about paragraph 263. I'm going to read this because it is shocking. It should be shocking to our viewers. It says, in cases where a child confides in a member of staff about their feelings, but does not ask the school or college to make changes to how they are treated, right? So in square brackets, that is it's in the context of transgenderism, where if a child says, "I feel the opposite sex, but
yeah,
I don't want to use the opposite sex toilet,"
yeah,
there is, continuing the quote, there is no reason to break any confidence unless there is a related safeguarding risk. That completely contradicts the golden rule that
yeah,
teachers should not be keeping secrets, the
yeah,
child's secrets, particularly not from parents. And there
yeah,
we have a
yeah,
loophole again. You can
yeah,
keep
yeah,
secrets by this vague
yeah.
standard, a related safeguarding risk.
Yeah, and the problem is, Bruce, it's like it's why we got rid of, or it's why Section 28 fell, right? Because the exceptions become the rule effectively. Yeah, because nobody defines any of these terms, and they're all left to teachers and schools to interpret, who will, of
Yeah.
course, interpret them in the widest possible sense, especially if they're of an activist mindset. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's even worse than that, because um, the what it actually says, I think it's footnote 62 I've written down here. Yeah, the guidance actually says, look, it's very difficult to determine whether the child is just expressing a feeling or whether the child has changed gender in accordance with the Equality Act 2010, right? And if they have in accordance with the Equality Act 2010, then the school is under an obligation to accommodate them. Yep, a legal obligation. And the guidance says, because it's very difficult to determine, legally, of course, every school will want to avoid the risk of being taken to court for not complying with the Equality Act, and so will treat every child as if it is covered by the Equality Act. Yep.
Mm.
And my point is the guidance itself says it's very difficult to determine. So any risk averse school will say, well, we better just avoid any legal suit and assume it is, right? Which is
Yeah.
ridiculous. It's just like it drives a coach and horses through the whole thing in terms of parental rights, in terms of looking after. And again, the whole concept of something which is supposed to be safeguarding children actually embeds the very opposite. It really
Yeah.
does. And we've got this pipeline now. We've got this these guidance, these kind of safeguarding guidance. We've then got RSHE, which comes into force, the new RSHE guidelines, which come into force September as well, which actually, teaches these things to all children. And then we've got this clinical trials pathway, which has been paused at the minute, and even the guidance itself, right? These guidance documents, they actually say prepubescent children who express gender nonconformity are more likely to go on to medical solutions afterwards, right? In the very guidance. It's like, it's not objective in any sense at all. It's absolutely
Yeah.
ideologically captured.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, the whole thing needs all these sections kicked into touch. And they've buried it deep in a few little subsections and footnotes of a 200-page document, most of which is talking about really good stuff and motherhood and apple pie, and we mustn't have knife crime and we mustn't have rape gangs. No one's going to disagree with that, right? And they've just buried it in there. This is what makes me suspicious of the fact that it's not just incompetence, it's actually purposefully driven, Because when you put it in the
Yes.
concept of the RSHE guidance, which is also coming into force, and the pathways and things, you think, hold on, you've completely ignored the Supreme Court ruling around, biological sex in the UK, which incidentally isn't mentioned once in the entire document, and you've gone down your own embedded ideological path, hoping nobody notices. Well, we notice, and it's not good enough, and you're going to have to change it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to make another note for my American viewers, and then I'm going to ask you to explain Section 28, just to give you some
Okay.
forewarning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just a note for my American viewers are going to be thinking, well, hang on a minute. Surely British parents can just sue a school that is hiding information. What Americans often don't realize, they're not paying attention, is that the judiciary is so woke that if
Mm.
you first of all, if you follow the official processes of accountability, you do have judicial options, but they are practically and financially out of reach of almost everybody. So you
Exactly.
could call for a judicial review of a local authority which is refusing to follow its statutory obligations to hold a school accountable. But it's too expensive, and then the courts, even appeals courts, they want to grant discretion to other courts, to grant discretion to the institutions, and they'll refuse to hear your request for a review. That would be through statutory law,
Yeah.
and maybe even criminal law if you wanted to
Yeah.
accuse a school of harming your child by pushing on the child, transgenderism, which might lead to chemical or surgical non-reversible interventions. And as a parent, you might have been cut out of the consultation because you are considered a safeguarding risk, right? So
Yeah.
it'd be difficult for you to consider a criminal prosecution because the police won't be interested. They're on the same ideology. The criminal courts are not interested.
Yeah.
They're backlogged anyway, and they have the same
Yeah.
ideology. But
Yeah.
Americans are used to litigating civil
Yeah.
sorts or tort
Yeah.
law. But the courts are so woke, uh, and they have this escape clause of discretion. So
Yeah.
it's very difficult to sue
Yeah.
a public institution in Britain, where
Yeah.
by contrast, it's very easy in America,
Yeah.
particularly given your
Yeah.
constitutional protections. So I just wanted to put that note out there. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned Section 28. of the Further and
Yeah.
Higher Education Act, which is mentioned only once in the whole 200 pages here, and only for the purposes of defining the colleges.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about Section 28. Can you explain to the viewers what
Sorry,
you
I was
mean?
talking about Section 28 of the Local Authority Act, which was
Oh,
abolished
okay.
by the Labour government some years ago. Yeah. Do you want me to talk
Okay.
about
Yeah, yeah. Explain why
that? So,
that's significant.
yeah, I mean, because that was so the way it was structured a little bit different than the US, as you can imagine. We have local authorities, which are a bit like the states, but so much smaller, right? So local authority and some stuff is devolved. So education is devolved to local authorities. That it's managed by legislation which covers the whole of well, I don't want to go off on a tangent about what the UK is and how it's different from England and Great Britain and all those things because we'll get lost. I can if you
Well,
want,
they're
right?
nations, yeah, they're nations or
Yeah, yeah.
provinces,
But
or
so it's
yeah,
devolved to
and they're
different
like states
nations.
within a
Yeah,
federal
yeah, yeah.
system.
But let's
Yeah,
focus on England, right? Because that's
yeah.
easier. So you had a Local Authority Act, and Section 28 of the Local Authority Act said basically you're not allowed to talk about homosexuality and things in schools at all. It's just not on the curriculum. Just don't put it there at all. You're not allowed to. It was the only way of making sure that it wasn't abused, right? Um, and then there were loads of amendments to that section over time, and the amendments and the exceptions became the rule. So Labour then came along and abolished it and just got rid of it and said, this is rubbish anyway, let's just get rid of it. And now you have all sorts of different things, one of which is this, right? But again, the exceptions are the rule. Yep. So the document talks about very rare, very rare that that transition will occur. Well, nobody describes what very rare means. What is there a quota such that
Mhm.
if you change your gender, if you're in the first 50, you get in. If you're not, you don't. It's ridiculous. And the exception becomes the rule when you've got activist teachers, when you've got schools, as I mentioned earlier on, wanting to avoid being litigated under the Equality Act. Well, they're going to urge on the side of caution and presume that something has taken place. And also, if you express a feeling, we don't have to talk to parents. And even if you say you want to do it, we'll consult with your parents about how we'll treat you. And if we disagree with them, well, we'll carry on anyway. There's we've got if you look at paragraph 249, I don't know if you've got that there, Bruce.
Yeah,
You know,
I can
the
get it.
idea of the idea of stealth transition. As schools are told not to maintain kind of fixed structures and avoid rigid rules based on gender stereotypes, right? So a school can just, with no formal agreement, just say boys can wear skirts, um, literally, right? And
Yeah,
or even boys have to wear skirts, right? It's like it just gives them the right to just do what they want in these areas, which is absolutely insane.
yeah,
Again, it just removes parents from the consultation, from the whole process, if you like. Um, and the wording is so vague as to just allow almost anything. And the problem we've got is that there are too many ideologues in schools. And not only that, but there are too many external organizations who want to influence schools. And I know what happens, right? Because I go around the country, I speak to thousands of our supporters all the time and meet with them in meetings in different areas. And I get heads say to me things like, I've had this conversation where somebody says, you're rung up by an external provider. And the external provider says, would you like us to do your relationships and sex education training for you? Or are you homophobic? Right?
yeah,
And you know what the message is there. If you don't
yeah,
want us, Mr. Head, right, we will interpret that as you're obviously a homophobe. We will complain to your governing body. We will tweet about it. We will complain to the newspaper and the MPs. You will, and the school doesn't want that kind of flame. It's not big enough and tough enough and strong enough to back you. You'll end up getting out the job. So essentially, you'll let us in. We'll teach what we want to your children, and no
yeah,
one's going to argue with it. Because if anybody does argue with it, we've already discussed what happens to you. Yeah. And
yeah.
and no one's got the money to take this. No one's got 50K to sue a school and say, look, you're breaching the Education Act. No one's got the money to do that, right? So it doesn't happen. And even if you have got money to do that, you've got to put your child on the line. Yeah, because your child has to share these things with you. Your child has to kind of be part of the process. You've got to put yourself and your reputation on the line. You're going to be vilified. You're going to be attacked. The mob will come for you, and the mob will contact your employers and say, why are you employing a homophobe who's trying to persecute, trans people or gay people or whatever? Your life will be ruined, even if you got
Yeah,
the 50, right? So
yeah,
that's where we are. And it's a terrible situation, Bruce, and we've got to get out of it.
yeah. And perversely, safeguarding can be weaponized to punish you for making complaints under safeguarding.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah,
you can be judged a risk to your
yeah,
children because you
yeah,
have the wrong political views, and then you get
yeah.
banned from school
Now,
property. You
let
did,
me. Can I
yeah,
balance it? Can I balance it,
yeah,
Bruce? Because we do live in a liberal democracy. I get that. This isn't a dictatorship or a theocracy. It's a liberal democracy, and people have the right to live the lives they want to. Yeah. But where we need to be very careful is what we teach children, because these are very highly contested beliefs and views. And the evidence is certainly not on the side of the ideologues, whether it be the LGB or the T, the evidence doesn't back it up. Yep. The evidence doesn't back up things like born this way. It's just not backed up in the science. Okay. In fact, the opposite is very, very prominent in the science. Yep. Not only that, but when you look at lifestyle implications for people who choose these lifestyles, or sometimes they don't choose them because early effects of childhood means they just end up in these situations. We don't want to go down that road, right, and discuss this, a big discussion, but it's not always choice. But the lifestyle effects are significant. And so given the fact that, well, born this way is a highly contested theory, right, whether it be LGB or T, yeah, the lifestyle changes really are really significantly negative impacting wise. Yep. Given both of those two things, we ought not be embedding this into malleable minds. We know how environments can influence highly adolescent sexuality. Given those facts, we need to be extremely careful what we teach children, let alone embedding it, prescribing it as these guidance do. It really is absolutely the worst thing we could possibly do. It's not safety at all. It's the exact opposite.
yeah. And you make the point that there's too little science in this guidance, and I've got a great example, an exemplar of that, which is again, it gets back to the lack of admonishments. So where
Yeah.
the guidance seems to be pushing transgenderism, and certainly giving too much discretion for schools to push transgenderism and claim that they are the justification is to safeguard the children from harm, from frustrated uh, gender fluidity or parents who don't agree with teachers. There are no admonishments referring to the science, such as to say that there's not a single sentence that says, hang on a minute, most children will go through a phase of gender dysphoria without and they'll get over it and they won't change sex. They don't need
Yeah,
to
yeah,
change
yeah,
sex.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
just a period most children go through. That is scientific, and there is no admonishment to teachers. It could just be framed or phrased or framed simply as, remember, this is a fact, scientifically proven fact, that
Yeah.
gender dysphoria is a phase for most children. It does Gender dysphoria in itself does not prove that the child is born in the wrong sexual body.
Mm.
Um, and generally there's no admonishments. There is a lack of science here, and
Very
I'll
much
just
so.
briefly remind you as there that the lack of science is in addition to the semantic problems where terms are used with very
Mm.
consequential uh, as very consequential standards, terms like harm, abuse, and they're not defined. It's a
Correct.
basic literary mistake. This is supposed to be guidance in interpreting statutory law, and the key terms themselves are not defined, and
Mm.
further they are undermined with caveats which are not defined, such as flexibility. Let's not have rigid rules.
Yep.
Let's have
Yep. Yep.
discretion.
Yep.
It
Yep.
is as a literary product and as a scientific product, it fails.
Yep. You're absolutely right. It's incoherence, right? It doesn't It's I don't know who wrote it, and I know it'll be some civil servant stuck in an office somewhere, or a couple of them, and they were told, because we've been waiting for this for a long time, right? And
Yeah.
somebody was told to get it out the door, blah blah blah, and somebody else read through it, and maybe they put it through Chat GPT, whatever. But actually, it's incoherent. It's either incoherent or it's intentionally deceptive. Yep. So as I said at the beginning, the intention is to make people think, oh, they've ticked the boxes. This is really good. Just like with the CAS review that we had. And I was one of the few people that were outraged at the CAS review, because it was a Trojan horse. So the CAS review, which everyone says, oh, the wonderful CAS review, first, okay, the consequences. We closed down Tavistock, right? Which was a massive child gender clinic in the UK, the only one. We closed it down. What happened? Loads of them opened around the country that have no scrutiny now in the same way. Yep, terrible thing. And secondly, Cass said, first she recommended the puberty blocker trials, right, which is just abhorrent. Let's experiment with gender changing medicine on little children, right? What on earth? Who's championing that nonsense? And then thirdly, she introduced the idea that a small number of children genuinely go through a gender transition. Again, absolute ideological bilge. It was a Trojan horse from start to finish, and people swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. Yep, complete nonsense. And unscientific in those areas as well. And it's just stunning how nobody will look at the science. And they won't look at the science because it doesn't give them the answers they want, Bruce. And that's why they ignore the science. My feelings are more important than your scientific facts. And in fact, your science is homophobic and transphobic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
what can you say to that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, Tony, I've ranted a lot about my what I focused on in my reporting. What have we not mentioned that you dislike in the guidance?
What have we not mentioned? I think we've not mentioned misogyny, right? Which is something
Oh,
to.
yes, let's do
So
that.
so I
Yeah.
think it's paragraph 521 and 528 off the top of my memory. That actually they don't define misogyny at all, but they crack down on it, and they link boisterous behavior for little
Yeah.
tiny children with
Yeah.
rape and killing by vicious and violent men, right? And you
Yeah.
think, oh no, hold on. It's perfectly acceptable for boys to be boisterous. And that's that there is, it turns out, a difference, generally speaking, on a population base between boys and girls. And it isn't just in the trousers. There are other differences too. And the social science is completely behind that. But let's not talk about the science. Instead, let's try and get boys not to be boisterous. Let's turn them into little quasi girls if you can. So everyone's soft and malleable, and everyone's quiet and sitting, without complaining about anything else like that. And if you do kick up a fuss, you're a future killer or a rapist, so we're going to have to deal with you harshly straight away. No, that is not toxic masculinity. That's toxic empathy. Yep, it's the idea of different predilections out of control in the school environment and in the legislative environment, and we ought not be doing it. Boys have to be boys. We require, heroic masculinity to run our society, to build our buildings, to all sorts of things that happen all through society that require men to be men.
Yeah.
And we need boys to be boys in order for them to turn into good men. We don't want to turn them into little silent puppies. Yep, that's the last thing we want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the whole misogyny stuff is another terrible thing.
Yeah,
Um,
and we should give some examples of this because we don't want the viewers to think that we are exaggerating. But you have alluded to the demonization of the idea that boys are different to girls.
yeah, yeah,
That is demonized in the guidance, and that boys. There is also demonization of the idea that boys are. I think you phrase it as boys are just boys will be boys, but this is actually under paragraph 521.
yeah,
the guidance makes clear that there is, quote, a zero tolerance approach to sexual harassment. It should never be passed off as banter, just having a laugh, a part of growing up, or boys being boys. It should
Yeah,
never be
yeah, right.
passed off as that. But hang on a minute. What again? That is so slippery. You
Yeah.
anything could
No
be
definition of terms whatsoever.
demonized.
It's left to
Yeah,
individual teachers. Yeah,
yeah. There's too much discretion here, and it is demonizing
yeah, yeah,
boys.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we should mention that I think I've certainly reported on this, and probably you have too. The same
Mm.
government, the Starmer administration, has a plan to re-educate boys for what I call the pre-crime of violence against women and girls as
Yeah,
adults. So if boys say something which a teacher considers misogynist,
yeah,
then they can be flagged for re-education
yeah.
as if that is a pathway. What they said is as a pathway to violence against women and girls.
Exactly,
Uh,
exactly.
and it is so open to abuse by
Yeah,
ideological
yeah,
teachers. So if a
yeah.
boy says, I'm not gender fluid, I know I'm a boy,
Mm.
that could be interpreted as boys being boys. Oh my God, that we have a zero tolerance approach to your lack of tolerance for gender fluidity by your
Yeah,
certainty
yeah,
that you are
yeah,
one
yeah.
gender. And then they
That's
could
it.
be put in re-education as children. It is
Yeah,
another disgraceful proposal from this government.
yeah,
I've reported
mm,
on it with the passion that I'm is coming out of me right now.
yeah,
And what infuriates me about this guidance is it doubles down on this um, language of boys themselves just being boys. Boys being
yeah,
boys is a problem. They're
yeah,
problematizing
yeah,
boys being boys. And if you do that, what are you left with?
yeah,
Transgenders
yeah,
or or feminism,
yeah, yeah.
femininity as the only allowable gen, gender posture.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, one of our Family Education Trust reports, I think it did some research among schools and boys and found that a third of all boys are essentially being taught you're fundamentally broken and there's nothing you can do about it because you're a boy.
Yeah.
Well, it's just absolutely absurd and insane. It makes your blood boil. It's like, oh my goodness, what are we doing? We've just got to sort this stuff out, knock it on the head. And again, when we have instances of this, that teachers are sacked and they're not allowed to work again, because they can't be trusted around children. We've really got to come out fighting about these sorts of things. And there's another, I don't know if you want to carry on with that, or paragraph 241, which is another one that we haven't spoken about yet, which
Go
again
for
talks
it.
about home education, yeah, which is big in the US, right? And
Yeah.
it's growing in the UK. And again, there's this subtle warning that home educators are beyond the view of the state, and so we can't trust them. So again, it's like we've got to make sure that you're doing what we say you must be doing to your children.
214,
Yes.
effective home education.
Yeah, less visible to the services that are there to keep them safe, right? Right? How now? What kind of a phrase is that? Paragraph 214. Homeschoolers are less visible to the services that are there to keep them safe. Oh, rise. Yeah, because this is all about safety, not indoctrination and ideology, isn't it?
Right.
Um, I don't trust you to decide what is and isn't safe for me to teach my child. Yep.
Hmm.
Get your state hands off what's happening in my home. Yeah. It's like, no.
Yeah, and
And
we
so,
should
yeah,
mention there is a two-tier justice aspect to this, where where Islamist extremists are teaching some children as, under the nominally as if they're being homeschooled, but they're
yeah,
actually effectively in madrasas that happen to be located actually normally in mosques. They're not even in homes, but if they're in homes, a home is being used for lots of children. So it's actually not the
yeah,
parents
mm,
teaching their own children. A
yeah,
cleric will show up and start teaching children from other homes, and they're basically getting an extreme religious education without fulfilling the standards in sciences, arts, humanities, whatever,
Yeah.
that the nation requires. But because that particular religion is privileged by the state,
Yeah.
there's no intervention there. But
Yeah.
a Christian family
Yeah.
might be flagged for a social worker visit, which has much more
Yeah.
potential
Yeah. Yeah.
power down the
Yeah.
line than it should.
Yeah.
So this is not just a war on homeschooling. In
No.
practice, it's a war on Christian homeschooling, or
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
sort of homeschooling which ideologically is
Yeah.
not aligned.
Yeah. The the massive issue and what's happening there is we want to make sure that you're teaching your children what we think is right and ideologically correct, and that you're not teaching them something else. And it's difficult if you're homeschooling because we don't know what you're saying. So we need to get inside that and sort that out. Well, that's absolutely terrifying,
Yeah.
absolutely terrifying. And you could you can see where this is going. If you don't teach your children the right things, you might find your children taken away from you. So we can
Mhm.
teach them the right things. Yep. We know it's rampant in the fostering industry. If you don't say the right things around these issues, you won't become a foster parent. You won't be allowed to. But if you're ideologically possessed, have as many kids as you want. We know, and the stats and the numbers, and in fact, there's a whole other conversation we can have at some point. But the fostering industry has been possessed by all this nonsense and is promoting it and is actively seeking to promote this sort of stuff and to seek out parents who promote this and live it as opposed to what you might call ordinary families.
Yeah.
And that's not the word normal is a statistical term which describes what most people are and do, right? It's not an offensive word. Most people are normal. Yep. You look at a bell curve. And so to say that this is not normal is not phobic of anybody else like that. Phobia is an irrational hatred and fear. That's nonsense. None of this is about irrational hatred or fear. This is completely the opposite. It's about rationality and science, which is being completely ignored from the whole conversation. Yep. And these things are trying to be, so the RSHE guidance tries to, it literally equates a child growing up with same-sex parents as a child growing up with its biological mum and dad, right? So no difference. They're to be taught as if they're exactly the same. That's nonsense. But anything else is indoctrination. That's why I just think this is part of a three-pronged approach. These guidance, embed it into the curriculum, and say you must teach it and you must do it. And let's give activist teachers whatever sway they want. The RSHE curriculum makes sure that every child in the country has to know about this and embrace it. And then for all those who are converted by it, and I use that term advisedly, if there's any conversion therapy going on in our country, that's where it is, right? We're converting and persuading children, little malleable creatures, and telling them, actually, maybe you're born in the wrong body, or maybe you're gay, or something else like that. And you should embrace it because it's really, really good. And it makes you special. And everyone wants to be special. So why don't you do this and you be special? And I tell you what, when you're done, we'll get you some, puberty changing drugs that'll hold your puberty off and change your sex. And then we'll get you some surgery and sort you out. It's just the whole thing, the whole pathway is horrific. And it just needs interrupting and stopping.
Yeah. So you mentioned fostering. So I think we should have a separate episode on fostering. That's a good idea. I'll just make a brief note that the problems in fostering that you described, so if I just paraphrase it, that parents who want to foster children, they have to express all sorts of ideology which aligns with this elitist dogma,
Yeah.
such as if I
Or
foster a
you won't get a
child.
child. That's right.
That's right. So if you want to
Yeah.
foster a child, you have to be open to the
Yeah.
child being gender fluid
Yeah.
and being operated
Yeah.
on if they want to change
Mhm.
sex.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not going to get a child.
Yep. Yep.
That sort of
Yep.
expectation is true in family law too, where who um, uh, parents who want to see their children right, they want equal access to their children after a divorce, they have to toe
Yeah.
this line too. That, oh yes, if my if my child is gender fluid, then yes, I'm totally open to that. And
Yeah.
if the social worker who advises the family court, because now we have the ridiculous statutory requirement for every family law case to be mediated by a
Yeah.
social worker, which just imposes more ideological bias on an already biased process.
Oh yeah.
If the
Right.
so
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if the social worker finds a social media tweet, or the child says, well, daddy doesn't like Keir Starmer, the social worker can
Yeah.
report
Yeah.
this parent is not open-minded, not a tolerant person.
Yeah.
I recommend that
Yeah.
access is reduced. And I hear
Yeah.
cases of that sort of weaponization all the time.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the case of Felix and Gole?
No, no,
So
tell us about
a
it.
lovely gentleman, well, a lovely gentleman in the UK, who was studying to be a social worker. Yep. Lovely guy at university studying to be a social worker. And his case is still ongoing. So this is some years ago now. It's progressed a long way, right? But he was on a course, and then somebody discovered, one of his fellow students discovered a Facebook conversation from an old Facebook conversation where he was asked about marriage, and he said he thought marriage was between a man and a woman, and it should be kept there, right? Well, short and the long of it, he was kicked off his social work course because his views were incompatible with social work, irrespective of the fact that, there was no evidence that he would be anything other than a wonderful social worker who would treat everybody with dignity and respect and not be discriminatory at all. Yep. And in fact, his practicals and everything else like that, flying colours. He was kicked off. Well, he won his case there, right? And he went on and finished his degree. Yeah, with the support of a Christian Legal Centre in the UK. They supported him to sort that out. Then, of course, he has to try and get a job, doesn't he? And he's offered a job, and then and then the then it goes silent, and he says, "Look, what's happening with the job? Oh well, we discovered you're that Felix and Gole. I mean, how many are there, right? But we don't think, our service users would, they might be scared to work with somebody who has your kind of opinions. Employment tribunal process. Um, he lost at first round, and he's gone to higher courts, and he's won the ability to go back on things. But this is a guy, this has been going on for years, because sometime in his past, he mentioned on Facebook, he thought marriage was between a man and a woman. He was deemed unacceptable for the social services profession. Somebody who holds that view. Yeah, because of the thoughts in your head around certain things, you're not deemed to be worthy to be in the social services profession. This is where we are, right? He'll win, right? He'll win big. He'll sort this out, and we'll have a good precedent. But it takes men of his courage to push this forward, and organizations to back him, because he hasn't got the money. He's got no money. Yep. And there's so many examples. I could talk to you about Aaron Edwards, who's unemployed. He's got 6 kids, and he hasn't got a job, and he can't get a job because he was kicked out of his lecturing post, because he said something to the effect of homosexuality has invaded the church, or something like that on a tweet. Yeah, it's like, well, it has. you know, Factually, obviously, look at the Church of England. They've been ripped apart for years because of this issue. Yep. And he got kicked out of his, and while he's going through the process, no one's going to employ him. He's got no money. And just the chilling effect, the process is the punishment. Same with Päivi Räsänen. Um, she's a Finnish MP who's, again, going through the process and has been going through it for years. She was their equivalent to the Home Secretary, I think it was, at one point. She made the mistake of saying something. She criticized her church because it was celebrating Pride, which she said was actually not biblical. Oh my goodness, the chief prosecutor went for her. She won, And the chief prosecutor in Finland said, no, I'm going to appeal. That's not good enough. And so she's had years going through this process, higher and higher courts, just for saying, well, this is my opinion. Imagine that. I know it's outside the UK. There's loads of other cases I could talk to you about in the UK. We're in deep water, and we need to sort stuff out. And hopefully we'll have a change of administration. We've had two different types of administration: the Conservatives, which and the Labour, which have kind of been the big controlling powers for decades and decades in the UK. But if I can use a rather vulgar analogy, they're both different cheeks of the same bottom. Do you know what I mean? They both coalesced around this woke middle. Yep. And there's hard. It used to be the case that everyone supported traditional marriage and family, and they argued about the best way of doing that. No longer. It's all woke nonsense now. It's all virtue signaling and everything else like that. We might have a change of that in 3 years' time. And it's not a political. We're not a political organisation. Neither of the two ones I'm involved with. But there might be an opportunity for somebody to see some common sense. But the problem is with politicians, and I'm digressing a little bit here, Bruce. You have to excuse me. But the problem is with politicians, they're populists. Yep, they're populists, and so unless they back and support stuff, so we had there was an anonymous survey in 2018. By Comres, one of our polling organisations, anonymous survey of MPs, and the majority of whom responded said they were too fearful to speak their mind about LGBT issues, right? Presumably they're too fearful to vote with their conscience too. And the reason being, they don't want to get attacked by the mob and lose their seats, right? And they know they will do, because people like you and me who have traditional views, we don't mob, we don't attack, we don't stand outside with placards saying, we're much more, we observe the process. We believe people should be able to speak their hearts and minds openly, and we'll have an ordered debate based on the evidence, and we'll reach a consensus. And that's how liberal democracies work. These people don't work that way. They will bully, and they will use all sorts of methods against you. You try saying some of these things on Twitter, your employer will be contacted. Yep, within hours. You try it, and that's the way they work. And your employer will think, "Oh, this is getting a bit hot. We're going to lose customers if we're not careful. We're going to have to deal with them." Yep, absolutely horrendous. The law needs to recognise that and change it.
Right. I've called it the tyranny of the loudest minority. So the tyranny of the majority has been replaced by the loudest, and of course social media amplifies this problem. So it's always been a problem, but there's always been a capacity for the loudest minority to dominate politics. But social media has amplified that. And I'll just add that I haven't heard that metaphor of two cheeks on the same bottom.
Well, I do apologise for the vulgarity.
It's very good. It's very good. I've called that the tyranny of the moderate, where all the parties want to pretend to be moderate, and they're so afraid of being called extremists, they become indecisive. It's like the Rishi Sunak is the epitome of that. Doesn't do anything because one side or the other will call them, accuse them of being extremists, and that's how you get this drift. There's no reform. There's clearly things going wrong, and we're hopefully heading for a correction.
Keir Starmer's got this problem as well, because he won't do anything unless a focus group says he should do. So in and of himself, who knows what he thinks and feels himself? Well, actually, we do, because of his past, and it isn't pretty, right? But in terms of communism and socialism, all that sort of stuff. But in terms of acting, it's all kind of focus group driven. And again, we've stripped away the person from the politician. Yeah, I mean, I think we should be recruiting politicians based on their private life, not their public life. Yeah, if I can't trust you around the people who know and love you the best, I'm not going to trust, my nation's decisions to you. Yep, I don't trust you. If you can't be honest and faithful to the people who know and love you the most, well, you've no right to be in public office. Nothing at all, because you're not trustworthy. You can't control your desires and emotions, and you're not trustworthy. And we need better
Yeah.
people like that. And we need private lives to come back into politics. Yep. So if you've got a terrible private life and there's all sorts of terrible things you do, no, you don't get to make important decisions that affect the rest of society because you're not trustworthy. Let's find some moral integrity. Let's get some upstanding characters. Let's get them back into politics, and then we might get some sensible decisions.
It's a good principle. I'll just add a caveat on Keir Starmer. He does follow focus groups, and actually that's the problem with most of the political class. We do not have conviction politicians
Yep.
anymore. There are problems with being a politician. It depends what your conviction is, but
Oh
at
yeah.
least you have certainty with a conviction politician,
Yeah.
and they will not just chase popular views which are not necessarily right.
Yeah.
But with Starmer, although he does chase focus groups, he is an ideologue too on certain issues. So
Yeah.
that helps to explain the
Yeah.
awful things he has agreed to
Yeah.
with the EU and with Mauritius. So the
Yeah.
handover of Chagos Islands, a terrible
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
It's a terrible deal. How could he possibly think this was rational, except unless he's being ideological about
Yeah. Yeah.
international law, and then
Yeah.
signing Britain back into the European Union, such as the Erasmus program, where he's going to pay over the nose for something that benefits mostly continental European students in Britain at British expense. Anyway, it's just an ideology
Well,
that
I
he's
mean,
got to get back
just
into
just
the
look.
EU.
Yeah, look up the Fabian Society. Of which he was on their exec. He had to resign when he became prime minister, etc. And most, a lot of the Labour front bench of Fabians. Look up the Fabian Society, look up its history, and it'll just tell you a lot.
Yeah. All right, Tony. Last few minutes. I've got one thing that we promised the viewers we would do. I just want
Right?
to, if you've got time for it,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I just want to finish with the consultation process itself, which we said right at the beginning is flawed. And I want to put on record for our viewers' benefit why it is flawed. So I have submitted my feedback through the consultation
Yeah.
process, and I'll just highlight a few things, such as
Please do.
the questions they ask you. It's a questionnaire, basically. It's a questionnaire, but it's a horrendously leading questionnaire. The questions themselves are leading, where for instance, the government is writing this questionnaire. They'll say, we've changed the text to this. So paragraph X, we've changed to this text. Do you agree that it's much better? Question mark. Right. So it's a leading question, and it can get worse than that, where they will have follow-up statements which reinforce
Yeah.
the lead that the leading question is trying to give you. And I'll just got one example. So question 30, there are far too many questions in this questionnaire. Question 30 says, this is I highlighted this because it's really important. It's about guidance on how head teachers should refer teachers who are accused of bad things to the local authority. So imagine a teacher is accused of abuse. That allegation comes from a parent to a head teacher. How should the head teacher handle that? You would think there would be certainty about how you handle that. You escalate it, but no, the guidance has discretion.
Mm.
That gives discretion to the head teacher. Sometimes you don't have to escalate it. What? What? So anyway, so the question about that text is, do you agree with the proposed addition to paragraph 75, which highlights earlier in the guidance that a head teacher or principal should consider whether a referral to the local authority designated officer is appropriate? Question mark. That's a leading question. So it's leading you to say yes,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it highlights it earlier. What could possibly be wrong with that? And
Yeah.
notice the question doesn't ask you, should all complaints against teachers be referred to the local authority? That's
Yeah.
what the question should be, but it
Yeah.
doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And then the leading question has this statement attached to it. Quote, this aims to clarify expectations for staff. That is a leading sentence. So
Mm.
it leads you to say yes. I said no. And there's a free text response where I
Mm.
answer the question they should have asked, which is, should the text tell head teachers to escalate any complaint against a teacher? Yes, they should.
Yeah.
That is what the
Yep.
text should say. That would be
Yep.
certainty, that would be clarity, and that would be moral.
Yep.
Teachers, schools should not be investigating themselves. This is a
Yep.
systemic problem in British
Yep.
education. And
It's
this
not rocket science.
guidance gives them the discretion to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Bruce, you like me a forensic analysis. And you may not know this, I'm what you call in the States legally blind. So I don't see to read kind of printed stuff. So I can't skim a document, which most people will do. They'll skim. I have to read the whole thing from start to finish. And very few people do that, you know. But that's when you pick up really, really, really interesting stuff, you know. If you put the time in to do that, that's when you really pick up the interesting. And again, the you're absolutely right about the consultation process. It's impenetrable. It's so long, and a lot of people just won't be able to do it, which is why the guidance I wrote just says you need to go to these questions. Yep. And these are the things you need to answer. Don't worry about the rest of it. Just go to, you can do the rest if you want. I just hope that in their collation, that they won't do something like say, well, we only take completed responses, fully completed responses, or something like that, because that would be awful. But I don't think
Yeah.
they'll do that. But then even if they, I mean, we've had this before. We had this with no fault divorce, with lots of different things. With the smacking ban in Wales, right, where I live, where you have a consultation and the overwhelming view is against it, and the government says, well, we're going to do it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because so the consultation itself just ticks a box, really, sometimes, because they'll do what they want to do. And I think, you know, that the view is on hopefully another administration doing things slightly differently, or being brave enough to do things slightly differently. But we'll see where we go. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see where we go. But you're right, it is impenetrable. I would encourage anybody in the UK to put KCSIE guidance consultation into Google and then go and fill it in. If you want help doing that, well, I think there's a thing on the C4M website in the news area. I think we talk about this. And again, I think there's family education stuff. You've probably got stuff which you've published, Bruce, as well. If you want help as to what to say and where to say it, just get in touch.
Yeah.
But
All
22nd
right.
of
So
April, that's the date, 22nd. So they've only given 10 weeks for a 200-page analysis with footnotes and everything else like that. You know, that, and the consultation itself takes ages to fill in. So the whole thing is loaded from start to finish, you know.
that's true. It is so long, it suggests to me that it's deliberately long so that people will give up, so
Yeah,
that the
right.
government can say
Yeah.
they don't want the feedback because they know that the feedback is going to demand all sorts of clarifications and
Yeah,
admonishments. And so it's deliberately long, not just long, but it's convoluted, and the questions are sometimes unclear,
yeah,
and your options to respond to the questions are sometimes limited.
that's right.
I'll give an example of that latter point so that our viewers who go give their feedback, and I think they should, even though we've just said it's a very difficult consultation process, I think they should give their feedback because we do want it's your democratic right for one thing, and
Yeah.
the government should hear the people on this issue. So here's another thing to look out for. So there are some questions where you're given no free text response at all. So the question will be leading you to
Mhm.
agree with the guidance, and then you'll have no free text option to clarify what you mean, whether you agree or not, or what you would recommend as a change. If you don't agree, there's no free text option for you to say, in some cases, this is what the text should say. So a good example of this, question 36, question 37. And again, this is important because the guidance this is paragraph 153. It's about racism and derogatory behavior.
Yeah.
And you are asked to, do you agree, right? So leading question, do you
Mhm.
agree that these references are helpful? And then question 37, are the new links helpful for schools and colleges? I said no in both cases, and I wasn't given a free text box to clarify why.
Yeah.
But here's my advice to our viewers. Your next free text box comes under question 39, and that's where you should refer back to questions where you were not given a free text a box. And my feedback there was to say that this is unbalanced. If you're going to say racism and derogatory behavior are plural, are unacceptable, you need the admonishment that you do not abuse this guidance to accuse everybody of racism when you disagree with their politics.
Yeah.
So, or to uh, perpetuate one racism in the
Yeah.
name of anti-racism,
Yeah,
which we
yeah,
have
yeah.
seen plenty of examples of.
Well,
So
yeah,
I'll just put that out
absolutely
there.
right.
Yeah. So
Mm.
viewers, please take advantage of your free text boxes wherever you find them to refer back to questions where you're not given a free text box, which I think is a deliberate ploy on the part of the designers of this survey instrument.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't follow, sensible objective design principles in terms of
That's
questioning
awful.
answer. You're right. It's very
Yeah.
leading, and a government should be trailblazing in that sort of stuff. We generally want to consult the population. This is not.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts from your own experience of giving feedback to the consultation?
Well, I mean, similarly, I found the same difficulties as you did, really. Um, and the thing is, so many people are asked to feedback on so much stuff and respond to this survey and respond. It's difficult, isn't it? But this is one of those things that I think is fundamentally important. It can affect teaching for a whole generation of children. It can really this can have a massive implication on society going forward. Yeah. So it's not one of those, it's not just a nice to have. Yeah. This I think is really important. And I would encourage as many people as possible to, if you've got some guidance in front of you from Brian or myself or somebody else like that, it'll take you half an hour, yeah, to go through and get to the right questions and put the right things in. But please do it because it really does make a difference. If we can I don't think they expected many responses because I think they tried to hide everything, but a few of us have spotted it. And if we can tell everyone to actually make responses, hopefully we can tie up some of these loose ends.
Yes. And please, viewers, read the reporting by myself and the good Tony here, which links to which I will put in the description box. All right, Tony, I've very much enjoyed talking with you, and I think we've
Privilege is
done some
mine.
good here.
Privilege is mine, Bruce. Really is.
Yeah. I hope we speak again. Thank you, sir.
Yep. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, sir. Bye.